Hello, today we are talking about how and when a child should start having overnight contact away from a breastfeeding parent. Now, I've chosen this topic not because it affects all families, but because the ones that it does arise for, it can be a really important topic, one which stirs up big emotions. And also one where, if the parents don't agree, the real ramifications for their relationship and also the child's relationship with the parents can be huge. So, firstly, I'll talk a bit about why this issue arises. It's normally in a situation where one parent is breastfeeding the child and has a routine with breastfeeding where the child breastfeeds to sleep at night and or in the morning, or if there are overnight wakings. And for this reason, the breastfeeding parent feels anxious about not being available to the child at those times if the child asks or wants or needs to breastfeed. And there can be real practical considerations if a child has been breastfed to sleep, back to sleep for its entire life, every day, every night, or most nights. It may not necessarily settle to sleep using other sleep associations, or not necessarily in the same peaceful way. And it's usually this idea that the child will have more complications falling asleep when they are staying away from the breastfeeding parent. That means that it can lead parents to be at odds about when overnight stay in contact with the other parent should start to take place. Now, it would be an easy answer, and I know that you will find experts throughout who say that overnight stay in contact shouldn't happen until breastfeeding has finished. But breastfeeding, although for most families and babies is an activity that ends within the first year of the child's life, it doesn't necessarily. And the World Health Organization recommends that children are breastfed for 2 years and beyond, and this is usually too long a time frame for the non-breastfeeding parent to feel comfortable without having their child overnight to stay with them. And so this audio blog isn't going to say that the overnight contact should not start until breastfeeding has stopped, but rather it will look at ways to find a solution for that disagreement. So, like all of my work, I do like to start from the position that both parents in this situation have good intentions. Both parents want the best for their child. The breastfeeding parent, although may be faced with allegations that they are breastfeeding for their own benefit or their own ease, I'm going to start from the position that the breastfeeding parent is continuing breastfeeding because they feel it's the best thing for the child. And similarly, I think it's important to look at why a parent would like their child to stay overnight with them. It's a significant portion of a child's day and time. It's one of those routines that a parents' involvement with which can really solidify their relationship and make a parent really feel equal and legitimate. And if a parent doesn't feel confident that they are able to comfort or settle their child at night, that can really undermine their confidence as a parent. And so, as always, I think starting from those positions, I know lots of parents will have other feelings about that, but I would recommend that we start from there and try to fake it until we make it, even if that's not how you feel about your child's other parent. You don't feel that that's where their intentions are. Let's try and fake it, and we'll see if we end up making it in the end. So the question of how and when are completely linked. As I said, this blog isn't going to come down on one side and say that overnight contact shouldn't happen until breastfeeding ends, and therefore it's not going to be a fixed time. I'm not going to come down and say that it should start at a particular age, because all children are different, all situations are different. And so the when is going to be related to how the overnight contact is arranged. If we're talking about a situation in which one parent is feeling incredibly unhappy about the contact happening, in this case it's likely to be the breastfeeding parent, and no agreements have been reached and no situation has been set up and it's not been discussed and their concerns haven't been listened to, then the when is going to feel like an impossible date to fix. Whereas if the how is carefully considered and drawn out and discussed, then the when is likely to be a sooner date. So I'll start with the how and share, as ever, my experiences of things that have worked, things that I've seen with families that have sort of unlocked some of these disagreements, and share a bit about why these work and how these can bring that when date closer for the non-breastfeeding parent. So, when parents disagree about anything to do with parenting, my most favourite starting point is to look at what information they're both looking at. When you ask a parent what they believe is best for their child, they will normally have picked that up from some source, either anecdotal or an information source, and feel very strongly that that information resonated with their instincts and what they believed. And so it's important to look at where this information is coming from. And it can be that a non-breastfeeding parent can be completely converted to the breastfeeding parent's point of view if they're able to share a source of information that is respected by the non-breastfeeding parent. So, for example, if the breastfeeding parent is able to use, say, for example, the World Health Organization's information, perhaps some other scientific journals, some study by a clinical psychologist or an educational child psychologist, that supports their view about when overnight contact should happen, then that may well satisfy the non-breastfeeding parent. Similarly, if the non-breastfeeding parent is able to bring to the other parent a weight of anecdotal evidence, perhaps stories from people they know or people they have connected with on the internet, of situations in which breastfeeding children have been able to have peaceful overnight contact with a non-breastfeeding parent, then the weight of stories like this might actually be the kind of information that the breastfeeding parent, it gives them comfort, and it's something that they're able to use when forming their own opinion. The big practical sort of question for parents in this situation is usually, do you try and ape the same routine that a breastfeeding child has with a breastfeeding parent, or do you try and create an entirely different routine? And it's important for this to be quite an explicit question that parents raise with one another, rather than just sort of tiptoeing around the question. It can be something really important, and it's obviously going to be useful in other issues of the child's life. Does the child respond best to having a really similar routine at both parents' houses? Obviously, with breastfeeding, you're going to have to substitute out some aspects of the routine at the non-breastfeeding parent's house. But it could be that the bedtime routine is almost identical. Teeth, bath, massage, towel dry, pyjamas, story. It could even be the same chapter from the same book or the same story, right up until the last moment when breastfeeding would normally happen. And you could substitute at this point, where if you were trying to sort of ape the routine as closely as possible, with a bottle of warmed expressed milk, say. And that would be a solution if the child responded best to having a similar routine. However, this is a situation where quite often the child responds better to a complete change in routine, and so rather than the child sort of expecting breastfeeding to happen, new sleep associations being used or created so that the child doesn't look and expect breastfeeding to occur. And this sort of latter approach is the real key to whether or not you start trying overnight and bedtime routines with both parents present together. Some people try doing the bedtime routine, and I know families who their parents are separated, where one will come over to the other child's house, do the bedtime routine together. And from that situation, you could have the breastfeeding parent try and step back from the routine at an earlier and earlier point. However, and again, this is something that you can talk about explicitly in trial in other areas of the child's life, and trial in this area as well. Does the child respond better to the breastfeeding parent not being there, and or perhaps not being in the home of the breastfeeding parent, where they may feel like breastfeeding is an option or it's an expectation, and then when breastfeeding isn't available, it may be harder for the child to accept. A useful place to start trialling to see where a child may respond and these kinds of things, do they respond better to routine or to the parent being available or not, is with daytime naps. You know, when a child is still having a daytime nap and falling asleep in the day, you can start trying these things with that, where a slightly less high stakes situation, because it's not overnight, it's not in the evening, and you can try that. You can start the non-breastfeeding parent settling the child in the day, and even trying to put the child down in the cot for a nap. And again, you can use a lot of the same routines and sleep associations. And this is often where a non-breastfeeding parent will gain confidence in being able to put their child to sleep and also settle them, is by using the daytime nap as a sort of practice. And on the flip side of that, when a non-breastfeeding parent is able to say to a breastfeeding parent that they've been able to settle the child with minimum fuss or distress in the daytime, and they've been able to do this regularly, then that's likely to increase the breastfeeding parent's confidence in not being there in the evening and night time. And finally, one practical thing to think about is what the communication between the parents is like at the time or soon after. So there can be situations between co-parents where really when the child is with one parent, there's little sort of ongoing communication between the parents, and they each get on and parent in their own way, or certainly without reporting back to the other parent. And this works for a lot of families. And even if it is a situation that works for a family dealing with this particular issue, this might be a time to sort of make an exception. And it may well be a situation where a timely text saying, you know, oh, he's asleep, or, you know, he was upset for 5 minutes, but he settled then, could go a long way to increasing the breastfeeding parent's comfort, in which case they're more likely to want to repeat it. And again, with this information, an agreement can be reached ahead of time that if there is going to be a large amount of distress or a child not settling or staying awake, parents can agree a certain amount of time after which the child might be returned to the breastfeeding parent, or the breastfeeding parent may come to the child. And again, it is recommended to not agree a time that is likely to occur, but what sort of a backstop time, so that there is an opportunity for the child to settle with the other parent, but comfort for the breastfeeding parent that this won't be an indefinite amount of time before they are brought back in. So the reason why I didn't talk about when there's a fixed date is because hopefully listening to some of those practical things will have stirred up some feelings in breastfeeding parents who are considering this issue, and some hopefully will have resonated. And it may well be the case that if 3 of these practical situations, for example, practical suggestions, are put in place and agreed, then a breastfeeding parent may well be happy to start trialling some of these quite soon, or, you know, in a short amount of time. And again, it's something that they should be considered in conjunction. It's really important that a particular date or age or stage of breastfeeding isn't just put in the diary as a sort of black and white date, but is actually considered in conjunction with practically how it's going to work. And again, that can be flexible, so if a child gets a cold or a child makes progress quicker, the parents can discuss it together. And I'll come back to really where I started in terms of when these things should happen. And I think we'll be surprised that when you're at loggerheads about an issue like this, it can feel like you as parents have very little in common and agree on very little. It can feel that you're completely polarised, and particularly an issue like this can really highlight differences. But it's important to come back to what you both have as an end goal. And most parents will want their child to feel equally comfortable, both parents, day and night, and feel confident that that parent is able to meet their needs, and the child to be able to stay with both parents separately. And so if you can keep coming back to that shared goal and reminding each other that that's where you're aiming for, then whether or not these overnights happen now or in 3 months or 6 months, you can feel confident that you're both moving in the same direction, and that end goal, if that's what you both want, will happen. So I wish you the very best of luck.